I am Santa Marabella, the Practical Prof. The racist events of the past few weeks have been particularly disturbing to me. Now more than ever, I realize that my silence is not okay, that I need to speak up and out against racial injustice. I wanted to know how I could be an ally and what I could do to be helpful. I decided to use the platform of my newspaper column, podcast, and now here on my YouTube channel as a start. In our first episode of BlackStory, we hear from 6 Black men about their experiences and their thoughts on what white people of privilege can do as authentic advocates.
My name's Travis. I really am focused on exploring and bringing awareness to how we bring people together.
My name is Cortland Thomas. I reside here in Philadelphia, social worker.
My name is Tim Wortham Jr., and I am Senior Director of Alumni and Family Engagement.
Jason Moss, I'm a personal chef.
I'm Cleo House Jr., and I'm a theater professor.
My name is Kenneth Fisher, and I work in libraries in higher education.
But I explain to people like this. My great-great-grandmother was anywhere between 103 and 106 when she died. We can't, because records weren't really kept back then, we don't really know, but we know she was around there. And I grew up listening to her tell me stories of her father being beat in the fields for eating a tomato when he was working. You know what I mean? I grew up with her telling me stories of how her sister was sold. And she would always tell us, don't believe what the history books tell you, because slavery went on a lot longer than they told you it did. Okay, this is at her at 103. Fast forward to my mother, who went to college in NYU and would tell me stories about the riots and the protests, and how she would go to college in the morning and there'd be cops on the buildings for blocks with assault rifles waiting for stuff to jump off. You know what I mean? And telling me stories of her growing up in the South and how she had to go into separate doors to the apartment building or an apartment store, or how she had to sit up on the balcony in the movie theater and couldn't go into the same movie theater or the same seats in the movie theater, you know? And let's flash forward to me. When we moved into the house I grew up in when I was 4 years old, I'm out playing with the neighborhood kid, and my mom calls me in for lunch, and the kid's like, oh, don't forget to take your toys. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He goes, yeah, if you don't, the niggers are going to take them. You know what I mean? So this is what I grew up with my whole entire life. So for white America to tell me how to react and how I should feel, they really don't have a point of reference.
Just growing up, period, my mom was very conscious to point out to me that I could not necessarily behave in the same way as my white friends. I grew up in a very small town, had a lot of white friends, just because just the simple fact of who I was as a Black person, you know, a simple childhood misbehavior could be turned into a misdemeanor crime or something, you know, when compared to my white counterparts. And so I always kind of had this double consciousness in terms of just how I behaved, that somehow I had to behave a little bit better, that I had to not be perceived as a threat, or not be perceived to disagree when I disagree, to disagree politely, and to disagree, you know, in a way that that you could try not to ruffle feathers and all that kind of stuff.
My family was very colorblind. It's a word that doesn't have a nice word connotation anymore, but that's how they raised us. So I went to very mixed elementary school, junior high, and high school, and so I didn't really think about race very much until I left the high school cocoon and started to try to do things outside of high school, as particularly related to theater, because that's my hobby and my passion. And at the time, I thought that's what I was going to do with my life. But I found out that the world sees color where I didn't see color. So I would audition for things, and even in high school, one of my teachers pulled me aside and said, you were the best one for this, but we're not going to cast you. And I didn't know what that meant at the time, but as the years went by, I found out what that meant.
You have to like pretty much be exceptional to be like even in the question of either getting a scholarship or even like being in certain plays or just anything, sports, whatever. You had to be super exceptional. Where my white colleagues, You didn't.
This idea of what it was like to be the token person for a lot of the content that was being created, it didn't really occur to me until like one day we just sat down and we were like, yo, how come we always get picked to like be in videos? Like, I like it and all, like, don't get me wrong, but then I was like, they're trying to get other people that look like me to come here. And I was like, no fault to them. Like, that's what they needed to do in order to get the message out. But like, not many people actually understood it on the flip side of like, oh yeah, I have to go record another video again because I'm the token kid that they gave the scholarship to. And like, that's a thing that, again, only a handful of students had the, you know, that same situation. But like, thinking about, okay, like, is this a bad thing or is this a good thing? I always looked at it as like, look, if they want to bring me to share my message and what this scholarship and things have done for me, like, I'm going to do my best to promote that so that way I can help another student that looks like me come along and have a similar experience that I had. They won't look at the ways that I've sacrificed my own career to help a manager who actually ended up not being an ally. He was essentially someone that was trying to continue to suppress me. And that's something that a lot more people should know, because I took a step back, went there to fill a certain role. They were like, hey, can you fill this role? I was like, you know what? Let me be a team player. Sure. Filled that role. Another guy came in, you know, he wasn't happy with this role he was in. So I was like, you know what? You can go take that seat. Mine will still be there when the time's right. Continue to build, keep learning. And then that time never came for me. It was a, yeah, this isn't the right fit for us anymore. But like, you saw all of it unfolding. You saw the teams coming and meeting with me to figure out what I knew. You saw the downloads and operations for all the things that I built. And then you just drop it on me like, yeah, no, see you later. And I'm like, yes, it's business, but at the same time, like, they don't understand that drove me into a year of trying to figure out if I was good enough or not.
So it must be like always being on edge.
You're always on the edge. You almost kind of want to make a mistake. Sometimes you want to speak out, but you feel like you don't want to be that angry black man or a black person and stuff. So it's kind of like, then you don't want to speak with emotion too much because it might scare people. So it's just kind of like, a lot of times, a lot of my coworkers and a lot of my directors and supervisors will say, you're very quiet. You're always quiet in the meetings. You know, they always wanted me to speak, but I learn more, and I learn more by just taking in the information, because we have a lot of opinionated people that's in the meeting. So a lot of times, a lot of people say stuff that I was going to say anyway. So there's no need for me to speak over them. So, you know.
I know, and I get it, why you would do it. It makes me sad that that's why you have to be, that you have to self-censor.
Yeah.
Because I know you would, and I know you have great ideas, and I know you have a lot of passion and commitment.
Yeah. It's just, you know, whenever I speak, I'm definitely passionate about it. So when I do speak, it's going to be something that I really am passionate about. So I just try to hold it to that. If nobody said that particular thing, then that's what I'm going to say.
The compliments that they have for me are things like, you're so articulate. What it implies is that it's surprising that I am articulate, you know, and that sort of kind of implicit bias or those things that we just kind of do that we're not necessarily thinking about and that aren't even necessarily malicious in intent, but they come from a place that needs to be addressed and that needs to be healed. And I think that that's something that far too many of us face and experience far too often.
There was a Halloween party, and my friends are all very liberal who attended the party. There might be a couple of people who identified as conservatives, but everyone, you know, university professors tend to be wholly accepting and forward-thinking people. And so this particular party was a costume party, And a faculty member and her husband came to the party in blackface. They were dressed as rappers, I think, maybe Jamaicans. I forget which one. It doesn't really matter. But they were in character. And I was the only Black person, as usual, at the party, which was not a big deal. But in that moment, it became a thing because people were looking to me as if, well, should we have a problem with this? Do you have a problem with this? And I'm like, why am I having to represent the entire Black race at this party when you people should be, as in the white people, should be stepping up and doing something about this?
Yes, I have experienced these situations of inequality through every job, from, you know, a job at a retail store and a job at a gym to where people get intimidated, or a job at a startup because your manager's intimidated that you'll take his job, or that like there's a kid that's flexing his white privilege and always wants to be heard, and it's just, it gets exhausting. And so like for me, I've always played the like I'm just like everybody else. I don't want to be known as the best Black salesperson. I don't want to be known as the best Black marketer. I just want to be known as the best marketer. And I think I can speak for a lot of people when I say that, like, that's just how I move. Like, I don't move as like the best Black person anywhere. I just move as the best at what I do.
The worst thing is, I feel that is when you are born, right? And you're naming your son or your daughter, you really have to consciously think about what you want to name your daughter or your son. And what I'm saying by that is not saying that it's going to be a cutesy name. If it's going to be an Arabic name, is it going to be too quote unquote Black? Would he, if he was named this name, would he get this job? Would they look at him and just see his name and be like, hey, nah, we're gonna get rid of this application? So you gotta be conscious about that too, what the Black parents are kind of looking at. And they are probably proud Africans, probably came from Africa, they probably know, and they proud of their heritage, and they probably want to name them that. But they know that they probably won't get by.
You will ask this question to 10 different people and you'll get 10 different answers, right? And so there are some who, based on any number of factors and reasons, are a bit more gracious, a bit more just appreciative of the effort. And then there are some who are just so tired and so worn and so weary that, you know, what one would find a kind gesture, another would find patronizing, or another would find meaningless. But what I'll say is, because we have these stigmas of, you know, angry Black man, angry Black woman, when we start to point out these sorts of injustices, and when we start to point out things that, again, people feel like they're not being malicious, and it becomes us being nitpicky, right? So it's harder to hear that message from me as the one who is potentially just being hypersensitive, or any other terminology that may be used to discredit my feelings or invalidate what I'm feeling in the moment and what I'm experiencing as a person of color. So when there's someone who is not the quote unquote victim that is able to identify the same issue and speak to it as a fellow person who may have even been an offender in the past, I think it just carries more weight, and it just comes across differently, because you're not whining because it's not your issue, right? You're not being sensitive because you're not the one who is having these acts perpetrated against. And so the message just comes across differently. I feel like it's received differently. And then there will always be those who just frankly don't care.
The Black man, the Black person in this country can never, will never, and will not ever have anything that the white man doesn't give you. And let me clarify that. I'm not saying handouts. I'm not saying I'm saying, so when we first came here, everything that we were given or allowed to do, it was because what the white man said. Once we were freed, the only things we could do was the laws and the things that the white man allowed us to, where we could live, where we could eat, who could associate with. if we could vote, if we could not vote. None of this was in our control. Even today, racism will not stop until the white man says it's going to stop, until they say it's okay to stop. Because we can march, we can protest, we can do all these other things, but until white America is as frustrated and fed up as we are and voice it on a daily basis every time something happens, not just when their buildings and stores get burnt down, that's the only way it's going to change, when it's said that we can change.
You do something that can be seen, because a lot of people say they're going to do something, or they donate money and that's their way of helping, but you need to do more than that. There were a lot of protests this past weekend, but there were a lot of protests that were not solely Black. There were mixed race protests, and seeing those people walk with you and do things with you is very different than, I'm going to donate some money because we need to help some people.
It would be different if I was in a situation where, I'll just put it in a more conservative situation with that stereotype. You might expect that to happen, but being that I was technically in a safe space, and for it to happen in a safe space, and then for all of my allies, who I had many conversations about diversity and race and whatever, to then be frozen, in deer headlights about what to do about this, because fair enough, they too were shocked that this colleague would make such a stupid choice, right? But the onus was put on me to be the one to represent, so to speak.
I have been very aware of how many people I've heard speak out against the looting and rioting who remain silent on the murder. And I'm going to call it what it is. And so that part, and just as you accented there, that slight shift in perspective where we're not appearing, even if it's not true, if we're not appearing to value economics and retail and stores and brick and mortar over human life, because that's the message that we're receiving when we're reading, these people who are in such outrage at Urban Outfitters being on fire, but at the same time have been literally absolutely silent on the fact that, this man, other men and women of color have been killed while in custody, while subdued, unarmed. There's always a reason why that part is justifiable. There's always a reason why that part is acceptable. And to ignore the fact that to date, there has been little to no consequence for all of these murders gives me pause when your focus is still on the fact that windows have been broken and spray painted. I remember that, when it was nothing but peaceful protests, there was still an issue with Colin Kaepernick taking a knee. There was still a focus on what he was doing instead of the why. And part of to go back to your previous question, part of what the privileged individuals can do is stop for a moment and consider the why.
So, just speaking up, speaking out, because like I said, unfortunately, your voice is powerful than ours at times, because even in this situation, and it's about us, but I'm not asking none of my my white colleagues or my friends to do anything crazy that'll get you arrested or anything like that. I'm not saying you to dial for the calls or anything like that. I'm just asking you to check on your fellow friends that are of color, and that can be Black, that can be Indian, that can, anybody that's of color, to check up on them and just to see how they're doing.
I had a lot of friends reach out to me. I read one text from a buddy of mine, and it's just something that's so simple. Just want to tell you that I love you, man, and I appreciate you, and I'm always here for you.
I hope listening to these Black men has helped you understand and empathize with their challenges and their pain. I also hope you will commit to speaking up and out against racial injustice in whatever way you can. If you or someone you know would like to contribute content for future episodes, or if you have feedback you'd like to share, email info@thepracticalprof.com. That's info@thepracticalprof.com. Thanks for watching BlackStory. Make Black Lives Matter.